Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing, live show number 421. I am your host, Loren Gray. Thank you so much for joining us live. If you're watching us on Roku TV, Amazon TV, Google TV, Apple TV, Samsung TV, yes, all of those. We have the Hospitality Channel also on your Apple iOS as an app or Google Play as an app for your Android phone. We are literally everywhere. Plus, also simulcasting on multiple pages on Facebook, single page on LinkedIn, multiple channels on YouTube, X, now that I've stopped getting past the idea of calling it Twitter, and of course, Twitch, if you use your media console for your watching of stuff. I am finding more and more people that do that. And we're finding more and more engagement with people that are watching us on their media console, their Xbox or the PS5 or whatever have you to it. So thank you all for catching us no matter which way you did. And for that, let's get right to our topic today. I guess I should pertinently apologize. We just went through, of course, the passing of Adelia, the hurricane. So we had to go back to what we were before, which was elevating everything in our office since we got flooded with Ian coming through last year. And in preparation for this year, fortunately for us, unfortunate for the Big Bend area of Florida, we were spared the direct hit of Adelia. But nonetheless, hurricanes, whew, and we're just now getting into that time of year where we're going to see more of. So you might see more of this background for a longer period of time than I planned, rather than having got it back up into a studio form. It might just have to remain kind of like this just as we go through this preparation process for anything that comes up weather-wise. So I digress. To our topic at hand today. Our subject today, since it is September 1st, is how to stress test your marketing budget. We haven't touched this topic. Well, we touched it in its format back when we had certain technologies, back in show number 297. That's how far back. And it's been something that's progressed in time every year with everybody that we work with clients and what have you. We go through the process within budgets of stress testing the budget. Now, if you're not familiar with stress testing, it's similar to kind of like what pilots train for. Obviously, different criteria here, but where they simulate problems. And in that problem simulations, you're tasked to create solutions. So it's not always clear skies, calm weather, flying level kind of mentality. Same too with us. For our businesses is what happens if. It's great that we're planning this, and we're planning on this growth, and we're planning on these repeat businesses, and we're planning on these channels, productions, and so forth. But wonder if. Now, the reason why back when we had the last conversation about stress testing, it was during COVID, during the lockdown of COVID, where we talked about, had you been doing this? Did you plan for the unplannable or the unanticipated, which then turns into anticipated, but neither here. And that's where the nascence of the conversation came. It's been a process for decades at different levels. The one I'd like to talk about today is about stress testing your marketing budget. As all of you in a level of position know, this is budget season. Last month, August, was a lot about accumulating data. We talked a lot about aggregating data, identifying data accurately, collecting data, platforms of usages of data. We've went through a lot of conversations about that gathering process that usually happens in August, the definement of top line revenues, assessing how that's going to be incremented down, who's responsible for what, how should you collaborate. If you missed any of that, I think show number 417 through, which brought us back from July forward, pretty much hit on a lot of that what to do in August mentality and what can you do in August. We're now in the September phase of the program, which is now that you've done all of that and you have taken your data and you've put it together and you're now laying it all on big tables with stacks of stuff and whiteboards and sticky notes and whatever way you methodology of doing this. We're now at the part of assigning how it all works for what you have planned to have happen. And that's the planning part. That's the level flight, clear skies, no turbulence kind of planning. This is what we expect. This is our return business from sales, our group contribution. This is our events and holiday cycles, business seasonalities. These are markers that you have identified as why you're assigning the occupancy potential, the ADR potentials from your revenue management team to those things. You have a historical look at saying that this holiday produces this. This is what we hope for it to produce next year, kind of thing. You're at that phase. What you need to do while you're in this process, which will mitigate your finalization of your budget from being an optimistic, wishful one to a pragmatically adaptable one, is stress testing your marketing budget. What do I mean by stress testing a marketing budget? Marketing, in its context of just marketing, is related to its contribution factors. What is producing your revenue? If you can't tell, and I used to do this at conferences, still do actually, all the time, is I ask people to tell me what their direct channel contribution is, percentage wise. Of their overall business, what does their direct channel drive? Out of, I'd say 40 cities total, 40 different places, because 33 of them were with Rocket, with HSMEI, and there was additional other ones, corporate ones, as well as national conference ones. Out of 40-ish times I've asked that question, I had two people actually give an answer that was relative to almost being right. A lot of times you don't know. Most people don't know what the direct channel contribution is. And if you say, wait a minute, I do, Loren, I do. I would then ask, what is your definitions of what's included in direct channel? And that creates a fuzzy line because some things are put into your direct channel that are not direct channel contributions. You've just, and most people do, assume them to be related to your direct channel because they drive business towards it. And for that reason, sometimes you throw too many things in the hopper of what direct channel contribution is or what contributes to it. For that reason, you have to look at, from stress testing your marketing budget, just your sources of business. I'm not here to define your direct channel because there's arguments for many channels to be possibly included in that perspective of direct channel. I'm not here trying to draw hard lines to that. Everybody has opinions about what those channels might be. Some people put OTA in because it drives business on their online channel, and they think online channel is collectively all of theirs, as an example. So stress testing your marketing is you've now got a lay of your land for what you are expected to produce next year. I mean, you've been given the goal of percentage growth for next year, revenue wise. You've begun to assign from historical numbers what that ratio of contribution from your channels are. What are some channels we're talking about? We're talking about online paid campaigns, your website's organic value contribution, what it produces simply by the engagement of the website organically, your social paid contributions, your organic social contributions. Those are four key ones that you can put to your CRM email contributions. Other channels that are now new and unique compared, especially since our last conversations about this a few years back, is your OTT contribution. What are you doing in OTT? Your meta search contribution. What are you doing in meta search? These are all aspects of revenue contribution from your marketing perspective. All of them have to be determined percentage-wise as to how do they contribute. We did share, and I will share in the notes for this show, a calculator that we've been using every year, and we keep refining both its mathematical metrics and also its questions of channels as more and more get included into the query to create a budget of your market. What is your contributions based on these categories of things? And the calculator is really straightforward. It's like it asks for your number of rooms, it asks for your anticipated occupancy, your anticipated annual ADR. Very broad numbers. Annual ADR and annual occupancy, as you know, are kind of a median of all the different months that contribute to that. But from that, it will then calculate based on industry averages, percentage contributions related to your paid campaigns versus your social, or versus your organic versus your CRM versus your meta search. Okay, and create a ratio value of how much revenue you should expect from each of these channels. The calculator goes a little bit farther in asking you questions like, what is your conversion numbers associated with some of these channels, paid in particular, and what is your average cost per click? And from there, it'll actually estimate to you what your budget amount might be for that particular segment to produce the revenue numbers you're looking for based on your inventory availability and expected occupancies and ADRs. It's rough numbers. I would attest it to being just one step above napkin math. But it gives you benchmarks, reference points, not even benchmarks, reference points as to where you can begin to determine the relevance of the percentage contribution, the amount of money being spent for that channel, and then, and this goes more towards the end of this month, the modifications of those numbers to produce the numbers you need. How does this all relate to stress testing? Stress testing is the removal of some of these items or the reduction of some of their value proposition to see how you would compensate for their loss or reduction. Again, going back to the pilot training analogy, they're in a simulator and you say, okay, cause engine 2 to overheat. What do they do? And they have to adjust the plane to continue to fly, of losing that engine or to scaling it back or whatever they have to do. They have to make the other engine work to adjust for it. That's what we're talking about on stress testing your marketing budget. So you're at the stage now where you know your revenue goals, we said. You know how that applies to your historical channels. Like, okay, we did paid campaigns last year. What did we do? Well, we spent this and made this. Well, the amount of money that was spent versus the amount of money you made, you have a ratio to that. It's famously the ROI ratio, right? What's that revenue number look compared to our goal this year? Well, we're supposed to go up 7% this year, 5% or 10%, or whatever the number is that the top line ownership has delegated down. How are we going to hit growth with that channel contribution? Is this channel able to be expanded? Is there opportunities to spend more and get more? Was there unrealized revenue? And the hardest calculation to teach people is the unrecognized revenue, the unrealized revenue. If you had done this is the revenue potential you had. A lot of times I see projects either cut short or downscaled without the full potential of what they were intended to do. And they saw it only as a cost measure. Well, we hit our budget limit, we can't go any farther. Yes, but by stopping, you've lost all this unrealized revenue that you could have had on the demand that the market was showing. A best example I can give you of this is I hear of other agencies or other organizations for themselves talking about massive ROI ratios. We're getting 80 to 1 ratio on meta search. And they're very proud of that. It's like ROAS. I'm getting a 50 to 1 ROAS, for return on ad spend. It's great that you beat your chest about how successful you squeeze that $1 to make 50 or 80 times more of its value. The unfortunate part of it is you're missing the point. By having that high of a ratio means that you're not spending enough to the demand of your inventory. Now, in simple terms, if you're selling at market rate, if you're selling your best available rate at market, you're not discounting and so forth, which was the generation that you were getting that ratio at, then that means that there is a whole mess more people that would pay the price you're asking had you just simply spent enough money to get in front of them. That's what those ratios mean. That means you didn't succeed. You actually failed at yielding that channel's opportunity by not funding it enough to get that ratio down to a 10 to 1 or an 8 to 1 or whatever your basement threshold is for conversion value based on your net revenue. That's what that means. So it's not a beating chest success story. It's you miss the big picture, which goes back to talking about common vernacular, centralized KPIs, key performance indicators that everybody agrees on. This is our goal. Our gross revenue number, top line revenue number is what we're striving for. We're looking for the channel contribution to be a certain amount, which means it has to be a certain dollar amount, which means that's the goal. It's not the ratio of what you spent as the success metric. It's the production of the spend that is the success. That is the key element to being successful in your marketing budget. You were given a goal that everybody agreed, multi-channel or multi-departmentally, sales, revenue management, marketing, operations, that everyone agreed to. That was our goal. How we get there was all of our measures of contribution to it. So stress testing is where you remove those numbers of success and find out how else you would adapt. Now, the first easiest step to stress testing, and this is just a basic starting point if you've not done this process before, is let's take a channel that's easy to understand the definitions of the ratios of spend versus return. Your paid ad campaigns online, your Google ads, your Bing ads, your paid ads on there. When you do display or retargeting, we're not going to get too granular to it other than just paid ads at this point. So you're looking at your paid ads and you have a certain percentage of conversion. Okay. Now, you have a certain spend to that, and you do probably use ROI as a reference point as your spend versus return ratio, and you're happy with that, and more importantly, the people you report to are happy with that, and you're looking at that saying, well, this will produce this much revenue at the current pace of spend our budget has allowed. Okay, you have X amount of budget that's spent for that. First question is, do you have the ability to break the ceiling on that should the return merit it? In other words, unexpected volume of traffic great results with that traffic, do you have the ability to pour more funds in it? Do you have that ability to do that? Because stress testing is on two different levels. It's the reduction of and the oversaturation of the opportunity of it. Do you have the response capability, or simply when you hit your budget limit, you have to turn off the campaigns, you pause because you're not have the authority to continue to spend regardless of the return on that spend? Raise your hand because I can't see you, but all too many of you have that problem. All too many of you, I've seen so frustratingly that people will go over and stop their paid campaigns that are wildly successful and allow their OTA, unbridled, unbudgeted campaigns to continue to run where they're willing to pay the 18-20% commission when they were getting such an amazing yield on their own spend. Not to mention the loss of direct channel CRM value for all of that as well. But that's another, we've had that topic before and we'll probably have it again sometime in the future. So you have this channel. You first need to decide, can I spend if the ratio is correct? Do I have that green light? Or by the time I get the permissions up the food chain to get a answer that says it's okay, my opportunity window has closed. What is that? That's the first stress test of your marketing budget is, do I have the ability to modify my budget, good or bad? Okay. You don't need permission to not spend as much money. You do need permission to spend more money. But and then to define the threshold. What is the threshold that I know I will be allowed to spend more money without going through a multi-approval process? If I'm getting a ratio of 5-to-1, 6-to-1, I have green light already. Continue the program. We're all good. When that ratio goes below 3-to-1, I have a red light. I can't spend any more money. At that point, that opportunity has failed. Let's take that conversation the next step. Let's look on the inversion of, rather than going over and being able to spend more, what happens if I have to spend less, or what I'm spending is not producing? This is the reduction factor. This channel is not producing at the level that we anticipated. The first evaluation is performance metric. And what I mean by that is there a logistics or some systemic problem in the campaigns themselves? Are these campaigns not resonating? Are the lack of production of them because of the offer that they're tied to, the market that they're targeted to, the spend that we're allotted to? These are three factors associated with that. Okay. Either we're not talking to the right people, we're not offering the right product, okay, or we're not spending enough to get in front of the right people because our budget's too tight that their spend is not producing enough visual voice for us to represent ourselves well enough for the conversion metrics to be productive. Those are the three factors associated with that kind of analysis. If all of those are true, no, this is proper targeting, the people we're getting in front of are responding, our budgeting amounts, spending more is going to make a benefit to it, spending less will get us out of the window of voice that we want. So that's answerable to it. It just, the demand has changed from what we thought. We're talking to the people that are still interested for why we're marketing to them, but the demand metric that we anticipated, we expected X volume of people for the campaign compared to like we had last year. We had 10,000 people that saw our ad. Okay. We're only seeing 6,000 people or 5,000 people see our ad same time this year. Well, that means that we have to decide what is our red light breaker, in the sense of, is it an ROI, which is terrible to have because a lot of times you can dip and ebb and flow with your ROI, where if you just gave it the extra day, you'd be back on top of the pile. But after 72 hours, you mandated that if it doesn't produce at least 4-to-1, we cut the program off or pause the ad campaign, only to find out the next day, seasonally Thursday compared to a Wednesday kind of thing, traffic went right back up and you'd be back in business again. This goes back to good data, what we've been talking about for the past several shows, especially since the GA4 conversion as of July 4th and 1st. Same thing. Well, on weekend back then, like this weekend for Labor Day. You have to have good data to know that your demand date or your demand days of the week and your production days of the week are definable data points. It's fascinating with GA4, just as a small tangent on this, that you can produce these things that say that Tuesdays are my highest volume traffic days between 1 and 4, making this up, but it's relatively accurate. My highest production days, meaning those people that do convert, is on Thursdays from 6 to 8 p.m. How would you know these things? Because you can see it in your GA4 data. You can go look and see traffic volumes, conversion volumes. And then you can start creating connections as to who is the most out of both. when did we first get from them? What did they first touch? What is their attribution? Where did they come through to do what they did? What did they engage with, ad campaign or whatever? Because it all influences what we do the next time to try to repeat that. We literally try to repeat lightning hitting in a bottle again. It's not so much lightning, it's just pre-planning. Luck isn't luck, luck is preparation. So with this, you have these, what should I do? What are the first question about any stress testing of market budget, what are my thresholds where decisions have to get made? What's my high? What's my low? So you have fences. When we get to this point, we have to make this call. When we get to this point, we have to make this call. And what call is that? And what do we do? Okay, it's great that we know what we have to make a decision. What is that decision process like? When we get to a low ROI, when we get to a low traffic number, when we get to a low production number, what are the metrics that we make that trigger? What is our response? And let's be clear about things. And I want to make this as a very strong point. There is a very big difference between reaction and response. I know it sounds silly that we're harboring on the mentality of this. Reaction is like a bug landing on you. A spider, if you're afraid of spiders, whatever. Response is, what do you choose to do about it? Like, oh, whoa, spider. Yeah, okay. Come. I have to get the spider off, especially if it's one that's going to bite me. The difference of reaction and response is critical to your ability to understand how to stress test your marketing budget, any budget really, and for a lot more than that. But the idea is that responding to this is because you planned at least a framework around it. You can't what if everything. You'll what if yourself to death trying to figure out how to respond to every variable. You have to instead categorize how you respond based on the categorization of what's happening. Lower production of a media channel, higher production of a media channel, lower production of a CRM channel, higher production of CRM. It's categorization, not that your CRM had a false send or a bad link or whatever that particular logistics issue was. It's just the fact that we did not produce. What do we do about it? We overproduce or we're overproducing. What do we do about it? Those parameters and your response to them is critical to the success of adaptability for your marketing budget. So taking still the paid campaign program. So we've created upper threshold. You've been given blessings that as long as you ride at 5-to-1, you can continue funding the programs that are producing at that level. That's awesome. If it gets below 3-to-1, you have to pause with the caveat of how long does it run to 3-to-1? Does it just dip to 3-to-1 and you have to immediately stop it? Or does it have to run for 48, 72, 120 hours, a full week cycle? And that decision has to come with what we just discussed, is looking at your data to say, what are the metrics that would influence that decision? Well, it started going 3-to-1 on Friday, but Tuesday's our best volume. So even though 72 hours would be a Monday cutoff, we're going to run through Tuesday to make sure that it's not just volume of traffic, because we'll have our best volume of traffic in Tuesday. Historically, we've had it. And currently we have it. So let's let Tuesday run through. If we're still not producing beyond our bottom threshold of 3-to-1, we know it's not a traffic issue. So the other way to solve the other two components I tell you about decision making is, are we talking to the right people? That is bred from the idea that as soon as this happens, you have other targeting campaign combinations, filters, that you reinstitute. If you haven't already built them, you make them where you say, well, and I say this from the idea that when you first create ad sets, and I digress to a conversation we had about paid media and paid marketing, how to create ad campaigns. This goes back several different shows, but I think it's 402, I think is when we talk about this in better detail. When you create ad campaigns, you create a diversity of ad campaigns. You create the concept, the content and the topics are correct and accurate and pretty consistent. Very little dynamic changing to them. They're pretty much a baseline. It's multivariate testing is what this is. You want to keep the variations down so you can isolate the variances when you see production. But the targeting component of what you do with targeting is, okay, we're going to do this geo-targeting, this demographic targeting. We're going to do this demographic targeting without the geo-targeting. We're going to do this geo-targeting without the demographic targeting. Those are three simplistic variations of two variables. Multi-variables in each one, actually, but leave it at that. So that when they launch, you see how each are producing. because Google will allow for the allowance of them to be placed and see how they respond. Then Google begins to find granular finite who they show which ads to. The ads that aren't producing at your initial threshold requirement get cut off. You don't throw them away. You just park them on a shelf. Like, well, we worked that campaign for this reason. It didn't work, but we're not throwing away the campaign bill. We're just pausing the campaign. It's there. We're just not going to use it. And we're running with the most optimized campaign. When we get back to these low performance issues that are related to the possibility of the variable being these targetings that we're doing for this, you go back to that shelf that you have these ones on and say, maybe there's other variations that now might be more beneficial, because no ad campaign is necessarily bad. It just might be badly timed. So you need to be able to go and say, well, this ad, we made it for what we thought was a good reason. It didn't produce at the levels we wanted to for the reason we built it, but maybe it is applicable now because we're not seeing the production off of the one that we thought we were going to be seeing. So let's try that as a variation to our campaign set. So you begin to replug in these variable campaigns, these different campaigns, to see if it's an issue with how you target it. That's your other variation that you're trying to identify. You identified whether or not you are spending the right amount or letting it run the right amount, okay? And we went through that one. Now the second one is, are we targeting the right amount? And we're going to test that with the other variables that we had already pre-built. The third is whether we're spending enough. And that goes from proper research as well by your comp set analysis. Is others stealing your market share? As others produce, are they simply getting in front of you in line because they're willing to spend more and aggressively per click to get in front of what you're doing for what you budgeted for? Like if you're spending $1.50 a click and it had been productive up to this point, but you're seeing that your volume of engagement, your actual ability to be in front of people is going down where you're located as to how you're showing up, how frequently you're showing up, and where you show up at, then look at your comp set and see, are they replacing or displacing you? If that's the case, then you might be not spending enough money, that the market has gotten more competitive than you had anticipated from the time that you first announced, from last year's numbers or what you thought was this year's. That's a higher demand, meaning higher cost, because Google will charge people more and people are more willing to spend, and you've been pushed down in the rankings. And how often you show up, your percentage voice is down, your traffic you're being put in front of people are down. So your first analysis is to look at who is stealing your traffic. How? Are they spending more per click? Are they spending more budget money? Because those are the two levers and buttons that you have when it comes to budgets. And see if you're just being outspent. Now, this is where you get into a condition of whether it's worth it to do that, okay, depending upon who you're competing with, okay, where it's like, well, OTA has very deep pockets, hotels.com, Expedia.com, and they are dominating the market with their saturation of market spend. They do it all the time. This is where a decision comes in. You can try to fight it and say, well, we're just going to spend more money to show up for ourselves. And you bleed a lot more budget with very little return on value. There's a law of diminished demand that, yes, you can spend more money and force yourself in there, but the money you spend is far in excess or intolerably related to the amount of money you're actually generating from it, diminished value. So this is where you can look at, and this is part of your stress testing strategy. If in fact this is the case, that you're being outspent by your competitors, and your competitors that are outspending you are the ones with the deeper pockets, your own CVB, your own TDC, the OTA programs, okay, that you cannot financially compete with them, then the solution you've already preconceived is not to go over and just spend harder or give up, but to ride their coattails, to say, you know what, we're going to go over and spend for ad placement we're going to do travel ads. We're not going to be able to beat them in market for people interested in our market. We're just not going to be able to hold our space because it's going to be too expensive. But what we can do is actually do travel ads. And this is where math ratios come in. How much are we going to spend on travel ads? How much do we have to pay in commissions in addition to what's produced from those travel ads? Add that all together. And what does that dollar amount mean for what we're looking to gain from that channel? How much money do we want to gain from that channel? Revenue-wise, top line revenue. And how much does that cost us? That number is a calculable number. And you take that compared to what you have looked at from your market competition of how much you would have to spend to regain your percentage of traffic voice, and you balance them, saying, well, which one's which? Now, we've talked about this before. There's some great tools out there. We talk about on the podcast all the time. We just reviewed this one last week, and that was Geru, Geru. This is one of those ones where you can create a workflow where you literally say, This is our campaign spend. This is our campaign production. This is our campaign ratios. This is what we do. This is what we're generating. And it will give you a revenue number. You can actually play with a platform like that to calculate how much it would cost variance one, variance two. You can create two different workflows. If we did it our way, if we did it right in the coattails, how do they balance out? How much would we make versus how much we would cost? That way you're making a smart decision before you spend the first dollar towards that. This is stress testing your market budget. It's defining the conditions of what ifs in categorical ways to then determine what you would go through as a process of correcting for the issues that were created. Losing an engine, what do we do? As a pilot. This goes to every channel you're doing. I would say that in a progression, that you first look at making sure you know what you need to predetermine as decision models. And the first and most critical one is breaking the ceiling on value. Can I continue on with very little food chain endorsements, permissions? And what is my basement where I have to make determined decisions for termination or pausing? And what is the criteria related to both? First decision on stress testing for any budget, okay, marketing included. The second is a very large perspective of simple channel reduction or removal. If this channel is lower in its production than we have anticipation budgeted for, okay, production wise, where else do we compensate for that loss? How do we evaluate that channel's reduction or removal? What is our criteria? Is it based on the basic simple three that we did? Are we not spending enough? Are we not targeting the correct people? Okay. It's the process of determining what that channel's problem is just as important as determining what to do about correcting for that problem. So that is your workflow process. Okay. Definitions of parameters, criteria for those parameters, definition associated with the gross channel variances of reduction or its total loss. Then you create, what do you do about those variances? Okay, it's one thing to say a channel goes dead, which is not ever really truly to a point happening, but it can happen, that a channel just zero productions. It's usually a threshold of variance of its loss, its reduction of contribution. And you have to determine at what stages of which variances you respond. In other words, if it's just a dip in your paid campaigns, going back to that example, if it's just a dip in your paid campaigns and it's a fluctuation and you can make the adjustments of whether redefining your targets by reintroducing ad campaign sets that create variances that you can A/B test from, whether it's looking at your comp set and determining what monies are being spent from and how you would adjust for that in compensation, whether to join them or to try to compete with them and to create that math to determine those variances to it. And then of course the third, and I'm sorry, I keep not referring to it because it's one of the more simple first ones. Are we offering the right thing? Is our content correct? Is it the rate correct? Are we in rate parity against everybody else? Is somebody undercutting us and selling out from underneath of us? Are we overpriced, underpriced, mid-price? Where are we? What product that we're offering is a condition. That's the third I keep not referring to because it's really one of the first ones you look at. It's like, are we missing the mark with what we're saying? Are we tone deaf in our messaging? Are we ignorant to what we're asking for? If everybody's asking for a 150 rate and we're up there at 300, do we warrant that price? That's a first evaluation process, obviously. And I'm sorry I keep ignoring that as the third step, but just somebody text me like, "What's the third one?" Yeah, sorry, I mentioned it early on and didn't mention it through the whole process. So that's the three components to it. So you have to look at what your DEFCON status. There we go. We'll go for another analogy today. Your DEFCON status. What's your first response when it goes to a certain level? If it's only a 10%, 15% reduction in production, what do you first look at? And you might be looking at, performance metrics. Why did it go down? And is it something that we can immediately adjust for by spending more or changing campaigns or changing messaging or whatever? What happens if it goes down 30%? What is the more serious DEFCON 4 reactions? Going backwards, aren't I? DEFCON 1 is the peaceful one. DEFCON 5 is the bad one. Yeah, so DEFCON 2 is 30%. Sorry, DEFCON 1 is 10%. Thereabout. DEFCON 2 is about 30%. DEFCON 3 is where half of it's gone. Oh, wow. This is a very serious problem. What is this, a temporary thing? Is it a long-term thing? Maybe there's something related to your destination. Maybe there's a natural disaster or like a hurricane or something like this. And we know that this is situationally just the problem. It's not necessarily systemic to a demand cycle. Of course, then you have to look at the long-term impact of that, like we did down here in Southwest Florida with Ian and its residual impact on tourism. Um, and then DEFCON 4 would be where the channel is almost gone. It's not producing anywhere near, like 75%, 80% of it is just not working. And of course, DEFCON 5 would be the fact that the entire channel is unproductive. There. We made DEFCON channels for DEFCON levels for channels. The idea is that you should have a staged response to how big the variance is. That would be a critical component to it. The next for this process is identifying that. That's great. Doing what you would be doing with that particular channel based upon the variance that it's performing at is its own aspect. The other component to that conversation, and a critical one, is what do the other channels do about it? I'll hold that thought and I'll get back to it. The idea of, if your paid channel starts going from DEFCON 1 to DEFCON 2 or DEFCON 3, 20%, 40%, 50% kind of loss, where else can we make up? If the channel is not producing, we've already forensically looked at the problem, and it's not from the offer, it's not from what we're spending, it's not from the messaging, okay, the targeting, excuse me. None of those things are the causation of this. It's a demand cycle that's down. That channel is not being used for the demand to our market. That's the premise. Are there other channels that are performing better? Like the analogy, if you lose a sense, your other senses get heightened. Same true with this. We might find that we planned that paid media was going to produce at a certain level for a particular month, when in fact times have had to change, and paid social came into its own. It just turned into the channel for that month based on the events of that month, the business demand of that month, the holidays of that month, in a different way. We see things like, Twitter turning into X or something. I'm certainly not giving it credit for doing that and or for making this kind of analogy work or situation work. But say, for instance, everybody just takes to Threads, and all of a sudden Threads turns into this amazing channel that people are using to stay at your hotel. Unanticipated in the sense that it was like, it's a production channel, but it's not a targeted channel. Wow, what are we going to do about that? That's where our paid business might be shifting from. Like, they're stopping doing this and they're going over to do that. It's a very weird analogy because it never will happen, but never say never. You have to have flexibility of what other channels can compensate for the loss of the channel that you're experiencing. How does your CRM do? Is your email campaign able to absorb some of the demand for your revenue growth, or maintaining your revenue expectations and forecasts and budget? If your paid is falling short, or your paid social, can it help? Can your organic website help? Can your organic social help? Can your OTT compensate? You begin to look at your other resources. So other than just looking at the channel and what you can do in the channel to assess its reduction or variance of reduction of contribution, you also look at your other channels and see if there's a way to optimize them to compensate for it not working. In other words, can I push the throttle up on the other engine, going back to the pilot analogy, to compensate for my engine over on the other side not working as well? So that's your next stage with your stress testing of your marketing budget, is the assessment of your other channel contribution variables and how they can improve or compensate for the loss of another channel. The other, which is the really dark box to all of this, is the tragedy sequences or the unexpected things that happen, such as COVID's lockdown, COVID, wildfires, hurricanes, the increasing frequency of these very large and dramatically bad events that are happening, and even bad media, gun violence, and the stupidity of that, the tragedy of it, really, the stupidity of allowing it, really. Not getting political, but anyways, is all things that have to be thought of now. Times, days past, it really wasn't one of those things that you could adjust for in a budget. If something happened in your market and your demand to market went down because of it, It was an unfortunate circumstance that just had to be dealt with on a situational shoot from the hip. What can we do about it, kind of thing. If a tragedy happened in your city, and all of a sudden the demand that you had on the books, even or had expected to come, dries up because of the perception of your market. It used to be a toss the hands up in the air. We do what we can. We pause the people. We lay off people. We cut costs. Whatever. Knee jerk operational cutbacks, and we had dozens of shows about that back in the middle of COVID when it was all happening, as to the response necessary for the unexpected. Um, but nowadays, with the expectations from ownership, the expectations of management companies, and so forth, you should have a black box result, a folder you pull out and break the seal and go, if this stuff happened, this is what we thought we would do about it. You need to have those conditional things. These are the unpleasant things that not normally get shared with all of the team members. These are usually reactions that are very dramatic and that usually have a small audience that is aware of what you plan on doing should that happen. Um, if part of your hotel burnt down, if something tragic happened in your market, um, you should have some concept of what your initial reaction might be, from shutting off expenses to readjusting your marketing. Like for instance, we had a couple of very interesting shows, and this goes back 2 years. So I would say around show 250-ish range kind of thing, where we talked about having a crisis response for social media. What happens if you have a tragedy or a negative newsworthy event that happened at your property? What is your response? What is your response team? What did they do? And we talked about social media being paused immediately and everybody's access removed from it except for the designated voice of the business, so that you don't get the proverbial the intern posted wrong, where some tragedy happened at your hotel and somebody's saying, hey, it's Sunday 7-2, you should come join us, when in the news the tragedy is in the forefront. Having those mistakes, those mistaken pre-scheduled things and so forth, what do you do, and what's the protocol of addressing the social media engagement that happens with these things? These are parts of response actions, not related to our stress testing of the marketing budget, but things that need to be thought through. The budgeting process, the budget season this year isn't just about the finances of expectation and the attainment of it. A lot of it has to do with the pre-planning of what now, given the events that happened this year, do we need to plan for next year, or things that we need to add into our pre-planning for next year should these incidences happen again or worse. That is the real context to stress testing what you do for next year. It's not I finally got that off my plate. I figured they asked me for this much money and I broke it down into where I think all that money is going to come from. Justifying it or not is their problem, or so to speak, or hopefully they won't ask me. But this is how I cut it up into little pieces, that this will produce this will produce it, but no verification that you can actually hit those numbers. I see those budgets all the time. It's annoying because it's not because the person probably couldn't have done better. They just don't know they should have or could, or they didn't know how to. They just took a lump number and divided it up like a pie as to where they think the business comes from based on the margins of those contributions from the year past. Like, well, paid did this much percentage. Paid did 30% of my total direct channel, or what we got off the web, and paid social did 15%, and organic did 25%, and and then you just slice the pie up. But those numbers aren't real based on the conversions of the channels that they're being applied to, and verifiable that they can actually be hit, because nobody's planning on a lesser revenue next year. I wouldn't say nobody, but most everybody. Everybody has goals for lots of reasons, and we definitely harped on that in the later July show for 16, for 19, where the biased ownership perspective of they define a financial number that can be possibly unrealistic for their own financial means, their own financial gains of being able to get loan approval from banks and verified growth for them to include more properties that they would manage or own or buy or whatever. They need to show positive financial numbers. And so they create artificial positive financial growth for properties that oftentimes is unrealistic. We had those discussions. So in the world of stress testing, you have to look at these people that just take a number and divide it into channels with no verification that it's an attainable number. You need to call them on it. So you say this channel is going to produce this much money, and last year it produced how much? Oh, so you said that this channel is going to produce an extra $100,000 over the course of the year. How much do we have to spend for that? they won't possibly have an answer because they don't realize that they just applied a value without an assigned cost. Maybe they did, and they said, "Well, it's going to cost us $10,000." Okay, so you're going to get a 10-to-1 ratio on that. What is the cost per click? Is that going to go up? Is it going to stay the same? Is it going to go down? They might have not gone that far in their decision process, because then it's very easy to say, "Well, we expect the cost per click to go down." Really? And you have that based on what? What's the reason that you think that the actual cost for us to produce is going to go down for this next year? No additional competitors, because more competitors means the rate can go up because you're competing against their bids. Same demand, so you don't think that other people are going to jump on the wagon that they didn't jump on last year, which is also going to drive up the cost per click. There's an argument or conversation that has to go on with that. And then from there, even if they say, well, it's going to go up 10%. So you're going to get a 10% increase in cost. You're going to get a 10-to-1 ratio, which matches what we did last year. So you're actually saying we're going to spend more to make this number, but we're not going to actually make more number if the price goes up. See, then the ratios begin to break down. I'm going to spend more, but you're saying I'm going to produce more from it. When it's not the case, I'm going to produce the same, which you just pointed out in math. So it begins to create these fractures of how people try to hopefully figure they can get past the deeper questions. Hopefully they don't ask about this. Hopefully they just acknowledge the number. Hopefully they're looking for other things, and that my numbers are just a pass through to make sure that it looks right. This is where these budgets fail. This is why the budget integrity system is so flawed, because very early on in the next year, when these budgets are taken out and they're shiny new budgets and people are more worried about what they can spend than what they have to make, if all of a sudden it begins to break, we'll start falling off the wagon. I have seen persistently revenue growth numbers for this year that have never been hit because they were unrealistically formatted, unverified in their capabilities of being produced. And even though the hotels are producing year over year success, they're failing at their budget requirements because of the unrealistic numbers. Plenty of examples of that, sad as it may be. So axe to grind, but not necessarily an unworthy one, considering that this is where the stress test comes from. Because here's the opportunity that people are creating budgets for now, maybe haven't been given unrealistic numbers, is that you can prove what you can produce. The calculator that we've used year to year and we keep improving and you have access to, should you ever, and a lot of people have already used it, thank you, is the ability to show why you believe you're producing the numbers you're providing, why you will not be able to produce the numbers that you're being asked based on the budgets that you've been allowed, and putting that in front of people, creating the breadcrumb, the paper trail, not because you get to say, I told you so 3 months, 6 months into next year, but because it adds bullets to the gun for your conversation next year. I told you guys last year this was going to happen. You ignored it. I have the proof to show that I showed it to you, that you acknowledged it. You deferred it to be not relevant. And now here we are this year, validating more of what I said than what you wanted. And now we're going to the budget season again this year. And I'm going to have the same argument this year that I had last year. And you can't keep beating me up, and worse yet, not providing the success to my team that never can hit the goal that gives them the success that you've promised them, budgets and bonuses. And you're now deteriorating your own infrastructure. I've had these conversations. I've validated it with pointing out that you are killing the incentive of our teams, primarily sales teams, and revenue teams that are budgeted, and marketing teams that are budgeted are bonused out for performances. Because the performance markers that you've set into place are not realistic based on your expectation versus the reality of what funding you've given us to produce them. And although sometimes exceptional performances can occur, and that's what we're wanting to do, they can't be maintained, which is the problem of the lacking of the bonuses. These are conversations that are going to happen, if not already happening for you now, will be happening in the weeks to come if you're in those roles. Directors of sales, directors of marketing, corporate entities related to the same departments, revenue management included, so forth and so on. So I believe I have beaten on that for a while. Let's get back to the idea of the stress testing of your marketing budget. We've went through the protocol of the progression of how to stress test. The variances after what we've led you to are yours and yours to discover, because you will see by doing the simple first initial steps of parameters, channels, reductions, categorizations of responses, variation responses, other channels, contributions to compensate, will bring you to points where you begin to see your own next steps. If you just go through the 4 steps that we've talked about in progression, it'll open up the door to lots of other things that you can look at. I would caution you not to get into the granular what if scenarios. Those are the bane of all things because they're time consuming. And situationally, the more you finite exactly what you do for an exact issue, unless it's a grand issue, okay, is wasted time because that situation will, even if it almost goes down to exact similarity, isn't exactly the same. And it will have other modifiers that you just couldn't plan for because it just fractures like a pane glass, impact glass, when you hit it. When it comes to all the variations you create, you have to create main channel variations. If this, then this, then this, and it's very singular linearly with only one tangent varying off of each one, and then model it that way. And like I said, tools like Giru and things like that, Funnelinics and so forth are very helpful in that process. And I'll put those links in the show as well. To make sure you have those as resources in your thought process. Hopefully you're already doing this. If you are, you're some of the rare few that I have come across that have. More often than not, nobody does. They look at it as a scapegoat system. I gave you what you wanted. It didn't work out the way you planned. Not my fault. I gave you, like I said, what you asked for. The fact that these other things didn't happen were out of my control. I'll do my best, but it wasn't my problem. It wasn't my issue. No, it is everyone's responsibility to wave their hand and say, hey guys, are you thinking about this? We did, and it doesn't look good. Hey guys, what happens if this happens? Have you thought of it? We did. It doesn't look good. Or this is what we plan on doing. Be that person. Be that person that stands up and points that out. Don't be the one that just hopes that you can shuffle the things to make them look the way that they are wanting to be seen and then say, hey, not mine. That happened to you. Don't do that. That's not good teamwork on any category. So with that, thank you for letting me go on and continue about the discussion as to stress testing your marketing budget. We will, of course, on today's podcast, audio podcast, discuss tools. Giru being, again, one of them. I know we talked about it last week. We're going to put it in different contexts with other tools, kind of like a comparison tool. Like, hey, we talked about Giru last week. Now we have other tools we want to talk about in comparison to what Giru is. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to create these stress testing environments. We'll talk about our calculator budget that we work with and what we came up with the modality of numbers for and so forth, as to know a little bit better how the system works. And you can modify your own system. It's not here. We're not selling anything. It's a great tool to use. People have used it for over these years. It's turned into quite a very popular thing off of our website for people to download that and the MetaSearch calculator. A high usage at this time of year, obviously, you go figure. And I've had people modify it and give great suggestions about how to change some things, or could we add some things, or do you really need this thing, whatever. It's been really fun to deal with people going back and forth about the calculator, but it's a highly useful one. We'll talk about it on the podcast. One thing that we just started this a few weeks back, and it's gotten to get some really good legs to it. We started our own radio station. Yes, I know. I'm turning into a broadcast mogul. We have the TV station, Hospitality Channel, which is on, again, Roku, Google, Amazon, Apple, Samsung. There's always one I feel like I miss. And we do the podcast, obviously, which is on 39 platforms that you can catch. And we do that weekly as well. And like everything, the podcast has been for 17 years. The live show has been we're in our 10th year. But we started a radio station now. Look for the Hospitality Radio. The website is actually hospitalityradio.com. It's being built, so pardon the dust, because I'm trying to figure out which modality I want to make the template, but I want to get it launched and running, so it's been up for a couple of weeks. But we're on 26 channels globally. It's a fascinating world, international broadcasting. We're in 26 platforms around the world. We're getting some really good listenership. It's basically what I've done right now is I've taken currently my podcast. I just asked Tim Peter if he would like to add his podcast and schedule a designated time during the day which his podcast would run, like the Tim Peter Hour at 1:00, Mondays through Fridays, kind of thing, where his podcast would run. I'm reaching out to other people that I have a very high respect for that do great content podcasts, whether they would want their content put onto the radio station as well. But it's a 24/7. Again, just like the TV channel, the radio station is dedicated to all things hospitality. This is hospitality industry stuff. We're not there to, quote, entertain and give consumer-based dialogue about where to go, where to stay, where to eat, kind of stuff. We're not that. It's about our industry, like what we're doing now for the live show. I imagine I'll probably start putting the live audio tracks on for the live show as well, since it's usually me just waving my hand and talking to a screen. They'll make great podcasts. I have a face for radio. So we'll have those over there probably as well. We'll schedule them for certain times so that, if you don't want to catch the podcast in series, or look for the next podcast, which I'd love for you to do. And thank you so much for the thousands that do. You can go to the radio station if you just want in the background. And with the radio station compared to the podcast is what we do. It's me, it's guest hosts and so forth. The radio station can be all the people that we bring in to do it. So if you have suggestions as to what you'd like to hear on the radio station, as always, just like we have already for the podcast and this live show, you can go to hdm.news/talkback. There I always ask a weekly question audio-wise, and you can answer it. Or I also say, tell me what you're thinking of. And I get great advice, great suggestions, great feedback, great criticisms as to the live show, the podcast, and what have you. And then there's also a question that you can answer whether or not I can quote you, I can play your quote, I can refer to you, whatever. We always go for the permissions. Your data, not ours. But you can give us feedback about the radio show now, radio station. So you can say, hey, I would love it if you could put this kind of content on, or can you put this kind of stuff on? I'm going to reach out to some of the associations and see on some of the audio that's been recorded of older keynotes and so forth, that they're no longer trying to monetize in their association platform, whether we can start putting up old presentations. Like I always say, it's not that it's old and out of date. It's just some things are timeless. Old school stuff is just same skills, new tools for now. So a lot of times great older advice is still great advice. You just have to adapt it into the tools that are now available. So think about that. It's hospitalityradio.com. Also, just since we're plugging everything of ourselves right now, we do have a peer level group called Hospitality Marketing Club, which is hospitalitymarketing.club. It's just the screen has a little place to put your email in. I send you a quiz. If you can pass 90% on the quiz, it shows that you know or working with hospitality marketing. Again, we're not there to teach from zero. There's plenty of other, too many actually, places to teach you vernacular and buzzwords and so forth. This is for people that are doing what we're doing, hospitality marketing. They handle accounts, they work on things, they handle ad accounts, they handle content, social, whatever it is. They're in the space of hospitality and marketing. And it's a great peer group because now it's an open collaboration. You get to ask crazy topics that most people glaze over when you ask them because they're not in your space. Now you can ask people that go, oh yeah, or maybe I've had great ideas. It's a lot of fun. It's a great group. We do a lot of live Q&As and stuff. Not fun for that. And that's hospitalitymarketing.club. You can go there, sign up. I'll send you the quiz. As always, our TV channel, 209 countries. We also simulcast, as you know, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Thank you for everyone that watches. We recast the show 11:30 a.m. Sydney, Australian time for our APAC friends, and 11:30 a.m. Wednesdays, UK, London time for our UE and Mideast friends as well. So we try to make sure we're time sensitive to all the time zone. With that being said, though, we get some amazing people that are from around the world at 2 o'clock in the morning listening and watching us. So thank you very much for that. So with that, my name is Loren Gray. I thank you for the privilege of your time, and I look forward to talking to you all next week.